Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, a podcast and YouTube channel where we sit down with industry experts, both in and out of the nonprofit space, to talk about how to build and scale the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. I'm your host, Ted Vaughn, the co-author of Culture Built My Brand and the co-founder of Historic Agency. If you have not yet checked out the audio version of Future Nonprofit, it is a highly produced, amazing 20 to 30-minute journey through each of our guests' stories. Be sure and check that out. Like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. And I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. We talked to some amazing people. If you're being asked by a group of 5-year-olds what you do for a living, what's your answer? How would you explain what you do for a living to a group of 5-year-olds that might not be the most sophisticated nonprofit leaders?
That I throw a party in the Bronx that you're invited to, and you get to play in a truck and play with food and then bring that food to people who need it the most.
That's a great answer. Nice. All right. So, Dan, I find that every nonprofit leader I talk to has some either moment, incident, person, something from their past ties directly to what they're doing today.
Uh-huh.
What's that for you? What is the person or the experience or the memory that most tethers or most informs or most inspires what you're doing today?
Well, I think that I think there's a confluence of factors. I think that there is a professional moment during my career as a teacher in the Bronx, and that's kind of the one that I often share with the press and with our community. And that is, one day I'm walking home from teaching my 6th grade class in the Bronx, and on the way home, I run into my student near the subway playing on his phone, and next to my student, I see that there's an older woman who's digging through a trash can, who's looking for cans to exchange for money or maybe for a meal. I'm not sure what exactly, but it doesn't sit right with me. And so the next day, I walk in to the cafeteria and I take my student outside of the class and I just say, "Hey buddy, could you share a little bit about what I saw? Is it something I should be worried about?" And my student just says, "Oh, that's my grandma." And then he says, "It's normal." And that kind of, that was what, so I think everybody has moments that they choose for whatever reason not to walk by anymore. There's some things that you can't unsee. And for me, I think that was kind of that moment that really helped me dive in. But then there are so many other things that are just part of my life and my upbringing. I was adopted at birth. And I think that gave me an awareness of all of the luck involved in life from an early age. And I became aware of just how, a little roll of the dice in a different way could have completely drastically affected the outcome of my life. And so I think that was instructive in terms of giving me empathy for lots of different people and populations. And I also grew up with pretty strong ADHD and also a pretty strong nonverbal learning disability. And I think that just, not fitting in, I guess, and kind of being, just being neurodivergent and how that affects the way that one relates to the world around them. I think that those are some of the things. And also, I've been sober for since July 2009.
Congrats.
Thank you. I feel like that, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. And that whole process, I got sober when I was 21. And that whole process of doing a 12-step program, and it gives you an opportunity at a pretty young age to think about who you are and also who you want to be and see where there's a lack of alignment between those two things. And so I can't credit it to one thing. I think that often there's, there's the mythical story that we all tell that definitely has truth in it, and it definitely does push us forward. But then there's also the real kind of messy way that everything happens.
In that real messy way, is there a singular person who stands out as the motivator, the hero of your story, whether that be a parent, a coach, a teacher, just a person who, for you, has spoken into who you are today more than anyone else?
I think that my mom was instructive in who I am today. I think that she was a teacher, mostly before I was born, but she was a teacher in the Bronx. She taught reading to underprivileged kids, and even now she kind of tutors, and she's an older person now, but she still kind of volunteers and tutors. But I think that I her upbringing and I had her father was a taxi driver and she lived in the Bronx as a kid, and I think that that whole kind of all of that, I think, and how much she cares about people and about giving. Generosity is just part of who she is, and so I think that that's probably a big piece of it.
I'm sure a lot of the people listening have heard the Bronx. Maybe they've been to the Bronx, but there's no question they've heard the Bronx from any number of different, shows or books or articles. Give us just a really quick picture. If we were walking through the Bronx, how would you describe the Bronx? Because it's unlike any other borough. It's unlike Manhattan. Like what to you is the Bronx, and how would you describe it if somebody's walking down the street, magically finding themselves in the Bronx?
Yeah, I mean, the first disclaimer is that I'm not from the Bronx. I'm not a son of the Bronx, or a Bronxite in that way, and so I don't want to speak for people who were born and raised there. But I will say that it's definitely a cacophony of culture and language and new and old, and just an incredible diversity. And there's also, I think there's also a lot of striving in the Bronx. It's an incredibly immigrant influenced borough. There are, it's actually Queens, I think, is the most diverse technically borough, but the Bronx is filled with immigrants. My own immigrant grandparents, had roots in the Bronx, and so I think it's just it's really it's a gritty place, but it's also a place where it's kind of like a place where anything goes, I think. And so in that way, a lot, it was like, I don't know if you live in a place where they have those scooters, that you can hop on and drive around, like the Limes and the Birds and stuff. They're banned like everywhere in New York, except for many areas of the Bronx. So that's an example, like the one place where you can just hop on a scooter and ride around is in the Bronx. So I think that the Bronx is just like a place where innovation can happen, because people kind of, the rules are a little bit different there. And there are good and bad things about the rules being a little different in a place. So
sounds like the Bronx fits your personality.
yeah, I had fun teaching there for sure. Yeah.
All right, well, let's go down that road. So we've talked a little bit about story of origin, talked about your mom, what did you want to do when you grew up? Like, what was your dream career? Do you want to be an astronaut, the president? And then take me on the journey of how you ended up being a teacher, and then we'll move into, your grassroots story.
Well, I wanted to be a lawyer for the longest time because my dad's a lawyer, and I idolized my dad, who would go to court. He's a litigator, so he'd go to court, and I thought that was super cool. And then I interned at my dad's law firm, and I realized that most lawyers are not particularly happy, and that my dad was an exception to the rule. And so I kind of pivoted, and I realized, wow, yeah. And I also didn't want to take another standardized test. I didn't want to take the LSATs, and I also just realized that a lot of lawyers were miserable, and so I actually, after college, I got into a sales career. I saw, if you remember, Groupon and Living Social and those daily deal coupons. I worked at a company called Lifebooker, which was a Brooklyn-based company that did daily deals in the beauty industry. So I was like calling up massage, whatever you're called when you do a massage. That shows you how little I know about the industry, right? I was trying to make it in this thing where I had to sell, Brazilian waxes and balayage and ombre, all these different things and body sculpting or whatever. And I had no idea what I was talking about. But I loved interacting with people. I loved the people element. And so anyway, I kind of had a quarter life crisis because I never felt good about any of the things that I was selling. Lifebooker went out of business, but I nothing against Lifebooker, but before that I sold office products, on the biggest online only office retailer, in the country. It's called Shoplet. And actually shoplet.com is still around, but it's just hard to find fulfillment selling office products. And so I like being on the phone. I like talking to folks. I like that human connection, but I just did not find the right venue for me. And so I decided to teach English abroad because I feel like that's what people do when they don't know what they want to do. They take a break and they go teach English somewhere. And so I taught English in Costa Rica. And I did that for almost 2 years. And I think that journey is really what got me on the path of back into the community, back into doing something for the community. And that's because I learned that I love teaching. And I went back and got my master's degree in teaching at Teachers College at Columbia. And then I started working at the American Dream School, which was a bilingual Spanish-English charter school in the Bronx. And that's where I met my students and their families whose journeys really taught me a lot about food insecurity. And that's where I started a side project that ultimately turned into what is now Grassroots Grocery. I mean, that's a very abbreviated version, but yeah.
When you were a teacher, I assume that doing the English abroad and then becoming a teacher, the amount of fulfillment, the amount of engagement with people went up beyond where it had been. Is that right?
Yeah. Working with people.
Yeah. You felt more fulfilled. You could see yourself in that type of career more long term.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, and it was funny because I never thought I'd be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. I always wanted to be a lawyer, which is what my dad was. I never wanted to be a teacher. But then I just fell in love with I just really liked teaching. I liked being in a community of people who were learning about something and being able to provide them with breakthroughs, and the fulfillment that you get from that. Yeah, for sure.
When you think about the work that you're doing today, I mean, very few people say when they're 8 years old, I want to lead a nonprofit. I want to be a nonprofit leader. Where does being a nonprofit leader fit on the fulfillment scale today?
Oh man, there's nothing I'd rather do. I think that it's not about being a nonprofit leader though. It's just about being a part of a movement, and whether that's a nonprofit or a for-profit or however it ends up, whatever version of whatever legal structure we want to call it. I think it's just about being a part of something that's rallying people for good.
Is the role that you're in today, or is the nonprofit that you've built today, the thing that you see yourself doing for the foreseeable future, or do you feel like there is a point where you check the box, you hand this thing off, you're a starter, you've built it, and you change roles, you get out, you start something new, or is this the long ride into the future as far as you can tell today?
I think it's the long ride into the sunset. I think that there are a lot of challenges that we still had ahead of ourselves that are really fun and stimulating and interesting opportunities. And, I think that if I were to ever feel unstimulated or bored or something, but that's so far from it's a challenge every day, and it's an amazing opportunity every day. And, it's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. I've gotten sober, but this is nothing, that's nothing compared to founding and running a nonprofit.
I want to talk a little bit about the journey, just bring us kind of context. So you're teaching English, you get a master's at Columbia at the teacher school, you move into teaching, and there's a degree of fulfillment. And you mentioned a side project that became what you're doing today. Walk us through that point. So you have a side project.
Yeah. So it started with learning during the pandemic. I mean, that experience with my student, seeing a student's grandmother digging through a trash can on the street and other moments like that were really kind of the initial seeds that were planted. Meeting these incredibly resilient, amazing families who put their kids in a charter school and wanted their kids to do the best that they possibly could, and yet we're dealing with struggling to have life's basic necessities, and that dichotomy was just really profound. And then the pandemic happened, and I learned during the pandemic. I think a lot of people did too. I can't kind of credit. Anyway, but I think during the pandemic, a lot of folks that were doing something else realized that it just changed the way that we oriented ourselves toward our careers. So teaching no longer was just about facilitating the transfer of knowledge, but it was also about providing for people's basic necessities, because that's just part of what a teacher, I think, probably always has been, but especially when kind of a crisis like that emerges. And so this was definitely work that was born out of the pandemic for sure. This Grassroots Grocery would not have happened had it not been for the pandemic. And it started with just an effort to get bare essentials for my students and their families. And so I threw up a GoFundMe and started raising money for two things, actually three things: for hotspots, for connectivity for my students, for shipments of food, just rice and beans and things like that we could get on Amazon and ship directly to families, and summer games and toys and books that because there were no summer programs or anything, and so those three things. And we learned in doing that fundraiser that there was so much need on the food side that the funds just ran out way too quickly. And I really wanted to keep it going. And I learned about this thing called the community refrigerator, which is something that I actually learned about it on a date. I was sitting on a park bench in Carl Schurz Park on the Upper East Side. And the woman I was on a date with said that she was doing some kind of organizing related to community refrigerators. And that's all I really remember about the date. But I remember I went home and I started researching community refrigerators. And I just thought to myself, we're in a school community that really needs food access. And there's this idea where you could just open up a refrigerator. The idea was that you put a refrigerator on the street, you had an artist paint it, and then there was this underground network of people who would just fill it. And so and then anybody could take food out of it. It's like a community cupboard, but with food. And so I started one with a fellow teacher, and that's the way that this all got started. And I was really into it. I really wanted to, and I think that that's also part of my past that influences my present is just this entrepreneurial drive that I have, because I just always want to do things better and do things differently, and so yeah, I mean it was just an amazing. It was just I was really stimulated by this idea of a community fridge, and I got a lot of attention around it, and that was really kind of the first version of and at the time it was called Mott Haven Fridge because it was a refrigerator in Mott Haven in the Bronx. Very creative, so that's how it started. Was a fridge in the Bronx that anyone could fill up and that anyone could take food out of.
Okay, so today you have Grassroots Grocery, and its mission, right, is, and I love the punchy, focused mission, advancing food justice by cultivating a community of neighbors helping neighbors. So there's like three really important points. This idea of not just having a fridge where people can get food, but food justice, but not just advocating for food justice through court or litigation or policy, but you're cultivating a community of neighbors. But it doesn't stop there. It's neighbors who are helping neighbors. So that is how you advance food justice. So it gives incredible, I think, focus to what you're doing. Connect the dots between Mott Haven Fridge or whatever you call it.
Yeah, Mott Haven Fridge.
Yeah, and this advancing food justice, because I'm sure there's been a journey of maturation and clarity over the years.
You know, Mott Haven Fridge turned into Mott Haven Fridge Network because we learned that there were other community refrigerators that other organizers had set up. And this was never this is, like I said, I just heard about this from some random person. This wasn't an idea that I came up with. And there were other people doing this incredible work. And I realized that one of the common problems was that all of these refrigerators were always struggling with being empty. And so I thought, well, what if we could get a bunch of volunteers together to fill these things up more consistently? And that's when I really discovered that I had a skill for volunteer activation. And we just really rode that momentum of building a community of volunteers. And over time, we learned that the best way to channel volunteers, or the best way to channel food through volunteers, wasn't through community refrigerators, but instead, and it might even change again, you know, but it's really always been, but instead, I think now what we really focus on is this incredible event called a produce party. And what a produce party is it's a shopping center parking lot in the Bronx that transforms into a music bumping, people-filled party every Saturday at 9 a.m. And we unload a truck filled with thousands of pounds of produce that we've rescued from wholesale produce vendors throughout the city. And then we pack it and we sort it with music blasting. And then we bring it in our own vehicles to our Grassroots Grocers. And Grassroots Grocers is just another word it's our term of endearment for super connected community leaders who have robust ties with their own neighbors. And so I guess we just realized that channeling volunteers to be the bridge between surplus on the one hand and incredibly passionate leaders on the other hand who had direct connections to people was the best way to build. And that volunteer activation could not be more important. Just as an example, I know that you saw that we just had the honor of being on the Today Show. And Scarlett Johansson is actually the one who brought the work to the Today Show because her daughter had volunteered with us through her school. And so that's just an incredible example of this community that we're building. And what's amazing is that, it might be Scarlett Johansson's daughter, or it might be, a bus driver's daughter. And it doesn't matter. And everybody's together sorting okra, and I think that's really what this is about now and it's, yes, food security, super important. A lot of amazing organizations do that. But I think that especially in this moment in time, what people are so passionate about when it comes to being a part of the Grassroots Grocery community is that, yes, we're tackling the crisis of health. We're tackling the crisis of food insecurity. But we're also tackling this epidemic of disconnection, this epidemic of loneliness. And we're building bridges and building connections that people are just craving right now. And so I think that's really been the crystallizing, that's been what it's about is just realizing that it's people power, right? Because you're right, we don't focus on policy or legislation or anything. We're completely apolitical because in my ideal world, there'd be people of all political persuasions and all races and religions and creeds and whatever else, all sorting string beans together. It doesn't matter what you believe. If you have a desire to come together for your neighbors and get out of your own head and your own bubble for a little while, through doing something super physical and tactile and fun and joyful, then come on board.
I love this model, and I love the passion for community. And I think probably your single greatest differentiator from so many other nonprofits that I talk with in this space is that you have this incredibly decentralized approach. You're not reliant on a massive central distributing place. You're like a mobile, right?
Well, sort of. So I would say that the biggest differentiator on that side is that we most nonprofits in the food space, we have found, as they get bigger, try to acquire more trucks and move into bigger warehouses, and they have capital campaigns for moving into the warehouse that costs more $1 million than the one that they have now, and they say, all right, we got to add 5 more trucks to our fleet. That's the way that they grow. And I would say that yes, we are definitely distributed in the sense that we are operating out of a shopping center parking lot.
Yeah, you're totally decentralized.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is we are still, our starting point is the same in many cases. So we're not like, it's not like our volunteers are bringing the food. We're still rescuing our produce from wholesale, and we're doing that in a centralized way. But it's through our it's through our volunteers that we're moving the produce into the community. And so I think that's the only point that I would put on it.
So I want to talk about scale, growth, and mission.
Oh God, yeah, those are hard things.
Well,
still learning.
I often talk with people who have what seems like a very differentiated, value-driven model, but then based on the person I'm talking with, they'll quickly say, "Listen, I'll abandon 80% of our model today if there is a better way for us to scale our actual mission, the things were most important. Like these aspects of our mission I hold loosely, these aspects I hold tightly, the vision I hold tightly." What do you at Grassroots hold tightly to?
Neighbors helping neighbors. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You get the question.
Yeah. So. Yeah. What I think is indispensable for our mission is community. And that's really the North Star, is how can we bring people together to give back to their neighbors? And food is an amazing vehicle for it. And I don't even think that we ever really have to pivot away from food, because there's so much of it. And it's such a great way to bring people together, right? We all have connections with food that tie into community. But it's really this community-centered element, this bottom-up approach and I also think that's, and I was talking to a good friend recently, because, I like to try to find people to give me clarity. And I was sharing with him about our North Star of community connection and volunteer activation. And he said that was a really important point, because it's the people that we want to recruit for Grassroots Growth, the people that are joining our team, if they see their alternative as like working in a food bank or something, then we didn't do our job. And so that was just a point that he brought up. Like, and what that also means is that we're playing a much bigger game, and it's a different game. And I think that's what, this past Saturday, for example, in our produce party, we had a church, we had a sports team, we had like 2 school communities, and then we had a bunch of free agents who just signed up online, and we had 200 people there in this parking lot of all ages. We also had a big international company, Ares Management, the private equity firm, and they were all together, right? The sports team and these schools and they're all together, and that's why there's so much, I think, magnetism toward what we're doing, because people want to be together and they want their kids to be together doing something that's not just staring at their screens. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it is really fun. And that's the other thing, I think, is that we're really fun. We just have this family friendly, joyful vibe. Although we're not exclusive to, like, the other thing that we do is the Great Sandwich Race in corporations, which is still also, it's still centered around volunteer activation. Without our volunteers in the Great Sandwich Race, we could, by the end of this year, we will have made over 150,000 sun butter and jelly sandwiches in conference rooms throughout corporate America.
I think DLA Piper was one of those.
Yes, they were. Yeah, DLA Piper was one of them in New York, and the reason that happened is because somebody heard me speak at a temple, at a synagogue, about the work. And he just brought DLA on board. He was a partner there. He brought me, and that's the way it always happens, is people just bring us into their communities.
So do you envision Grassroots, because your brand and your mission are infinitely scalable? There are very few communities across this country that couldn't use one of these, especially as the disparity between rich and poor, the economic issues continue to surface. Do you have vision for this moving beyond the Bronx or beyond the boroughs?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, so our immediate goal is our campaign called Deliver Double. And the goal there is to open up a second shift of our produce party. And so that will happen by the end of next year. We will have 2 shifts running, a morning and an afternoon shift, which will allow us to engage double the volunteers, because right now we're saying no to volunteers and we're turning groups away because we're capping out at our limits every week. And so we're going to be able to accommodate all those volunteers. We'll be able to accommodate double the amount of produce, and because we're also turning down produce every Friday for our Saturday event. And then we'll be able to also increase our community connections and reach more neighbors in need. And so that's the immediate. But in doing that, the other thing that will happen is we will figure out all of the foundational pieces that we need to then be able to scale the approach far beyond. And so it'll be an amazing learning journey that once it's fully realized, we'll be able to just, open up another produce party in Long Island City, and then another one in Brooklyn. And then, yeah, I mean, anywhere that there are people that want to do good, that there are vehicle owners, that there's wholesale produce, which is basically everywhere, and that there's kind of, urban density, right, to make those deliveries happen. I think that our produce party model can scale. And then our Great Sandwich Race model, that's been an incredible story of growth. We hired a full stack tech developer. That's the other thing about Grassroots Grocery is that we're doing it all with a tiny team and with a lot of tech. And so we have a CTO who was the chief strategy officer for a tech company that sold to the technology company Cisco. And he's a good friend of mine who was looking for something new to do. Jordan.
That's Jordan. Yeah. Jordan Motzkin.
Yeah. Jordan, who's an amazing unicorn. And then we also brought on Tohedal, who is a full stack tech developer. He was working at a venture-backed, Peter Thiel-backed, venture startup, and we were able to take him back to Grassroots because he was an intern with us many years ago, and he was in love with the mission, and so we built the tech to be able to scale the sandwich race, and so now anybody can operate a great sandwich, a gamified experience that anyone can operate it by just logging into this platform that we built in any office building. And we have part-time assistants basically running them. And what's great about starting with the sandwich race is that we learned all of the tech things that we needed to learn. And we're now going to work on that. We're going to use that same tech to now revolutionize the produce party. And I think that the sandwich race too, I was going to say that the scale the growth has been incredible. Last year we did 32 great sandwich race events in corporate America. This year alone, by the end of the year, I think it'll be like 80 events. So we more than 100x'd it. 100% growth. Yeah.
The tech is a way of facilitating ease of use that ultimately results in a very human experience.
That's correct.
The tech isn't replacing, the tech is simply making more elegant and more efficient the ability to get to the end state, which is human to human.
And how can we use tech to make it more human?
Yeah, that is a fantastic conviction that more nonprofits need.
Oh my goodness, yeah, absolutely.
AI, all of the things that wrap up in that topic. I want to focus on your leadership because you're clearly in this point of scale. You're a hustler. You're an entrepreneur. You know how to wear a lot of hats. I've known you now for probably a year and a half or 2 years, and you definitely have harnessed your ADHD as a superpower.
Thank you. I try.
What over the last 6 months to year has been the best leadership decision you've made, and what's been the worst?
I think the best leadership decision that I made was really advocating for bringing on our chief service officer, who just joined a couple weeks ago now. But Sherry Lyons was a full-time, basically, a really committed volunteer for I don't know 4 years or something. Her daughter Caroline interned with us. And she was a committed volunteer and is also just a rock star business coach and has a lot of experience in corporate America. And she had her own kind of health scare and one of these moments where she was reevaluating how she wanted to give back to this new season of life. And I was really strongly focused on making sure that she chose Grassroots Grocery. And so I think that, and just this idea of leaning in on service and knowing that to get from where we are today to where we need to be, that we need someone in who's incredibly gifted at building community. And Sherry's a community builder. And so that I think was the best.
I want to talk about scale, though. When you think about your leadership style, and this is going to relate to a lot of the people listening, what do you feel like success will require you to stop doing or let go of?
I mean, it's when let me here, I have it here. It's for those of you who are listening, it's a button that says no, and
the no button, the big red no button.
Yeah,
I love it.
And I actually wrote a LinkedIn article about this.
I saw it. It was great.
Yeah, and it was called "Why Our Chief Operating and Technology Officer's Welcome Gift to Me Was a No Button." When we hired Jordan, his gift to me was this no button. And he said that, the only way that we're going to scale this thing is if you say no to more things than you say yes to. And that's just something that I have to keep. So I guess I just have to stop. I have to just keep doing that. I think is the real answer. And just be ruthlessly focused on what that means, and also make sure that our team is all coalesced around what we're saying no to. And I think also, I know this is more about what I need to say yes to, but it's around really sharing with the world this dual mission. That yes, we're tackling food insecurity, but we're also tackling this crisis of community and crisis of disconnection. Because I think that by not being super clear about that, I think in some ways we are, but I think that there's still even more that we can do, because I think that some people still view Grassroots Grocery in kind of, they see our peers as food pantries and things like that. I think that they do incredible work, but I don't think that those are who our peers are. And so I think that being even more articulate about that mission is going to be critical as we move into the next phase.
If you're talking to a room full of nonprofit leaders of all shapes and sizes, what do you feel like the one conviction, the one lesson, the golden nugget is that you would most want to wave a magic wand and implant in their brains? What's the thing that you feel like life's taught you about this work that you would want to convey to others?
Do one or two things really well, and say no to everything else.
And is that you as a person or you as an org, the org that you represent?
As an organization, I guess, I mean, I think both. I think that as a leader, it's about also figuring out where do you provide the most value, and then delegating or deleting everything else.
Where does Dan provide the most value to Grassroots Grocery today?
I think that I provide the most value in community building, in being the leader of this neighbors helping neighbors movement. And I think, galvanizing people to join us is where I play the biggest role. And so whether that's fundraising or partnerships, it's bringing people along this incredible movement.
What's different about Grassroots in 3 years? If you're successful and you're on mission and without being delusional but appropriately aspirational, what's different in 36 months if you get it right?
Yeah, in 36 months, the Great Sandwich Race, I hope, will be scaled beyond New York City, because I think that that's a program that we can scale across the country. And in 36 months, we'll have at least 2 shifts in our produce party. And so that means that we'll be able to engage. This year so far, we've engaged like 7,000 volunteers, which is incredible in just 1 year. But I think that we'll be able to engage even more than that, because we'll have 2 shifts running and maybe even a second produce party location, just thinking about how we can scale that approach throughout. That's something that's a little bit harder than the Great Sandwich Race, because the supply, while it is very, very available, it's also, it's not, it just requires a lot more intentionality behind capturing it. And so thinking about what's the blueprint for that? Is it that we, teach other organizations how to throw produce parties? Are we opening them up ourselves? Are we partnering with foundations to teach their partners how to do it? But definitely thinking about how produce parties will live beyond the Bronx. So yeah, that's our, and it will always be neighbors helping neighbors at the core, community building at the core, people coming together to look out for people, because that's what I'm passionate about. I think that's what the team that we're building is passionate about.
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.